Hey friends, we're talking today about the important role the media plays in shaping the cultural narrative. And if the media loses its role of being a kind of a cultural watchdog, holding institutions accountable, and they move into the role of instead being what some have called the fifth column, where they actually partner with the powers that be to push a certain narrative, that's when things get to be really trying. We're seeing this happen right now, by the way, in all the craziness at the Smithsonian Institute, America's History Museum. It's shocking to find out how our history agenda has been hijacked by the left. We're also talking about some of the crazy ideas that Democratic Socialists want to put forth. So you're not going to want to miss this podcast today as we unearth some of these crazy things that happen when you have an ungodly worldview. We look forward to seeing you on the podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
This podcast, from its inception, has been dedicated to highlighting the power of ideas, that ideas have consequences, and that whoever controls the idea realm of society really controls the cultural narrative. And we've been trying to highlight this in podcasts, or some of our recent podcasts. I just want to put an exclamation point on why in the world Christians have to get involved outside of the four walls of the church and outside of just waiting for eternity perspective, although eternity is awesome and we're excited about our future with the Lord. But whoever controls the cultural narrative controls society. And we highlighted this last week when the President of the United States of America, the most leader of the free world, most powerful position on the planet, wants to give a report to the American people, a majority of whom elected him into office, and the mainstream media outlets selectively decide, well, we're just not going to do that. That is what you call controlling the cultural narrative. And Bill Federer, who we've had at church before, an incredible historian, he has pointed out that the press used to be a watchdog institution. That was why the freedom of press is such an important, part of our Bill of Rights, is because the press, a free press, is able to actually do investigative reporting and hold, politicians accountable and all this kind of stuff. But when the press lines up with the left in America, which is what we've seen, they actually become what has been called a fifth column, which is an internal force that shapes public opinion and political outcomes rather than simply reporting on the events. And we're going to highlight some of that in our podcast today. But I like what Federer says about the shift of power over history. Initially, it was military power dominating the ancient regime, so whoever had the biggest weapons was in control. And then it moved to a shift to political power, which concentrated on monarchies and governments. Then it moved to economic power, becoming increasingly influential in modern societies. And now we're in a position where media power shapes public perception and therefore indirectly controls the cultural outcomes. And he talks a little bit, I'm highlighting some of the things from one of Bill Federer's books. But he says it's not just about bias in the media, it's about narrative management. And he says that basically media institutions can determine which stories receive attention and which do not, which that happens all the time. They have the power to frame events through their particular ideological lens. They have the power to elevate certain voices while marginalizing other voices. And they have the power to shape cultural assumptions about morality, religion, history, and government. So in other words, they become literally the cultural gatekeepers, and their worldview frames everything, how the news is reported and all this, which is why I think we're so frustrated now. You can hear people bring up really good arguments about, a conservative point of view that either don't get heard or get completely, twisted, and because they're run through the meat grinder of a Marxist or leftist ideology. So we got to get involved. We got to have a voice, and we certainly need to reclaim journalism, because I think it's a lost art. Let's talk about what I don't know if you saw Brandon Gill, the freshman congressman from Texas. I love to watch that guy. he basically uses the Socratic method of just questioning to put the noose around his opponent's necks and to expose their hypocrisy. But of course, this was all the interviewing of the leadership of the Smithsonian, which is supposed to be America's, museum, America's history, and President Trump basically demanded that coming up to our 250th anniversary, that some serious steps be taken to reclaim what has been a hijacked agenda, a largely woke agenda that completely misrepresents, or I'll put it this way, views American history through the lens of CRT and a lot of Marxist ideology. But I watched him interviewing some of these leaders, and it was brutal. He was catching them basically in their own language and some of their own things that they tweeted or put out on social media, or actual exhibits that are in the Smithsonian. But I think it represents really a perfect example of what Federer was warning about, the media becoming this fifth column. Let me just highlight a few things, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. How would you like to be part of the National Museum of American History, and you basically treat America's founders as secondary figures in their own stories? So they're the ones that are actually responsible for American history. And how would you like to show up at the American Museum of National Museum of American History and find no mention of George Washington? Now, I just got to pause there. How do you talk about America without talking about George Washington? Thomas Jefferson, another massive figure in American history. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, not to mention the Constitutional Convention, the Federalist Papers, or whatever. So basically, the report that the Trump administration came out with contends that these subjects should be the centerpiece of an American history museum because they explain the nation's founding principles and institutions, and yet these major characters are nowhere to be found. Instead, what we find is a whole lot of exhibits focusing on modern social justice themes, emphasizing the founders' flaws. We've got here a slavery and racial hierarchy, the exclusion of minorities in America, systems of power and privilege, America's failures to live up to its ideals. All of these things cast America as a villain again. And again, you sit back and you wonder, do these guys have an agenda, or are they just operating from a completely different worldview and they have like blindness going on here? I mean, what do you think's at work here? Is this some nefarious plot to destroy America, or is this just worldview blindness that we're seeing? Nothing's like a loaded question.
I haven't been to the Smithsonian in a long time. I think there's so many things you said that's very interesting. How the world is shaped by ideas. Yep. You said, well, the world is shaped by guns and rockets and tanks. Yes, but those tanks and guns and rockets are shaped by ideas at the end of the day. And what are those ideas? So ideas is like the highest level. Everything trickles down from ideas. So the people who really want to win the wars, they might not have guns and bullets, but they can go with ideas. Now, the problem with ideas need to be validated with truth. Because you can create a delusional idea and you can run with it for a long time, but eventually it's going to hit a wall of truth, right?
Yep.
You can believe that you can fly all day long. Okay, you can have a whole gospel that you can fly. You can have a bunch of followers that thinks you can fly, but one day you get thrown off the building, you're not going to be able to fly. You're going to hit the ground.
Yep.
So eventually these ideas come to fruition.
They run into ultimate reality, like you said. They run into truth, and at that point, they come either crashing to the ground, or they are able
fly,
to stand
or
on
they
their
actually
own.
can. So it's interesting because they attribute American exceptionalism, the most powerful nation in the world. I look at that from a non-Western, well, I'm Western now, but growing up not in America, I come from an Eastern perspective. I look at America, I'm like, what have they done right that hasn't been done in other nations?
Well, in fact, I might add, I don't have this study before me, but it was a number of years ago when the Communist Party actually in China sent somebody over to the United States to figure out what in the world is the secret of America's economic success, because they were wise enough to go, we need to figure out what they're doing. And what we're not doing. And that's really the approach that should be taken by any wise leader in any other country is find out who's doing something well and figure out this secret sauce.
They look at reality and they look at ideas and they say, hey, there's a conversion between American values and reality that makes it work well. Now, does that mean America's perfect? No nation is perfect. By that standard, everyone should be trashing their culture because no nation is standard. But exceptionalism means that they are doing something well. And the names you've mentioned, your Washingtons, your Jeffersons, though they're not perfect men, no one is, they have embodied certain ideas. For example, that Washington says, I don't want to be a king. We're going to have 4 years, and then we're going to have someone else run for 4 years, and then I'm done. Like, that's a powerful idea that left a legacy for the rest of America. Imagine Washington says, I'm going to go be king, and we're going to start, the American, like the kingdom of America, what we will look like today. So I mean, just one example of our ideas. So back to your question of why people are doing that. I think, I don't know, maybe they have certain ideas. They feel like we have some other idea leads to prosperity, and the American exceptionalism idea is evil and bad, and we need to tarnish it. We need to deride it. Or, like you said, there might be paid by other globalists or whoever else who wants to diminish American values through some of this most powerful institution. The Smithsonian is a powerful institution. It's a powerful institution to communicate to the legacy of America who we're about.
Well, and it's not just any museum. I mean, there's all kinds of fringe museums, and we know that people who run museums tend to lean hard left. I don't know why museums attract left-leaning people, but there is not the balance, at least politically, in these institutions, and so they get hijacked by what we would call revisionist ideology. They would just call it, looking at history through the modern lens of, basically it's a Marxist lens, the oppressed and the oppressor, and that America is one of the leading oppressors, which again is a horrible treatment of American history, because one of the foundational principles of understanding something, whether it's the Bible, history, whatever, is to go back and to try to understand, for instance, what was the world like when this was written? So when you go back and you look at America, it's not fair to look at America's founding through the lens of what's going on right now. That leads you to pulling down a bunch of statues and everything because you don't understand the times in which people live. It's like viewing America's treatment of slavery as worse than the rest of the world, when actually our treatment of slavery was the best in the world in terms of getting rid of it. We were some of the leaders in abolition, including many of our founding fathers, who that was some of their passion behind separating from Great Britain was because of the whole slave thing going on in Great Britain and the desire to found a nation that was free of slavery. Not to mention a little thing called like the Civil War, where we shed nearly 1 million lives and their blood to free slaves in this country. So, it's picking and choosing. It's focusing on, again, that controlling what is said, what is not said, framing the situation in light of an agenda that you're pushing. This is all happening by and large, so much so, and I thought this was interesting. Senator or Representative Gill was highlighting things like this: hard work, individualism, self-reliance, delayed gratification, and the nuclear family are all painted under the broad heading of white culture. Like, what do these things have to do with white culture? These are Christian characteristics that any nation that embraces hard work, individualism, self-reliance, delayed gratification, and a mother and father raising children in the context of a healthy marriage, any culture that practices those things will thrive. But now they're called white culture because evidently these are things that only white people embrace.
Remember in the height of like wokeism, I forgot who or what, I just remember that someone says math is racist.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, exactly.
That? I don't remember what. It was so crazy. But again, it's like saying gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared, or whatever gravity is. I haven't taken physics in my life. That's racist. No. That's reality.
Right.
That's what works.
And it's harder to call, 2 + 2 = 4 racist than it is to call, the nuclear family racist or something, I guess.
Right.
It's hard to fudge with numbers, I mean, numbers, like you just said, there's a numerical value for the gravitational pull,
Right.
like that's not just because you're white.
Design a skyscraper around gravity.
Yeah.
And then you'll be successful.
Exactly. If you ignore the math, it's not going to end well.
I don't care how accepting you are. You want to be accepting of all gravitational measurements. It won't work. So again, you look at what works. See, I think one of the reasons why academics, which spout these museums and these journalists we're talking about, is because why their ideas are so out of touch with reality is because they come with these reality in these ivory towers that's never been tested. And when you and I talk about the interview between
I want to get to that in just a moment.
Yeah, but it's a great example versus somebody who sit in the echo chamber with their ideas and they bounce around a bunch of yes man versus someone else whose ideas have to be tested against reality all day long. And if they're off, their skyscraper collapses. So who's going to have better ideas, right?
Like economics and economic theory.
Well, in the business, your idea stinks, you're going to go bankrupt.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your ivory tower, your idea is terrible. Everyone will applaud you and high five.
Well, let's talk. And I want to toss you the ball here. Let's talk a little bit about this notion of colonialism.
Yeah.
America is constantly beat up, I think even all the way back to Great Britain when Great Britain controlled most of the world. But even there, it's a very skewed understanding of colonialism. All the things that the colonialists brought to these countries were not evil. I know, like, for instance, when William Carey went to India, it was an incredibly backward nation, not because Indians, by definition, are backward people, but because their worldview stunted the development of that country. They had a false worldview. When Carey comes over from a Western Judeo-Christian perspective and begins to implement a lot of these Western ideas, it led to incredible blessing. Now, of course, there were abuses because all human beings are fallen and all human beings are wicked by nature and need a savior. So wherever people go and wherever power goes, there's going to be an abuse of power. But the problem is it's a selective interpretation of history, and it basically makes just white Westerners the evil, bad people without explaining the fullness of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But it also leaves out certain other groups that nobody wants to talk about today, namely Islam and Muslim conquest. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I saw this article at the World. There's a decolonization forum, which I never heard of. Dr. Esra Albaziyek, I don't know her name, can't pronounce her name. She's the daughter of Turkish President Erdogan. And she argued that the Western centers of knowledge, which is Paris, London, Amsterdam, New York, which I wouldn't call Paris the Western centers of knowledge, but I guess it's got the museum and stuff like that. Whatever. Should be replaced by Istanbul and Jakarta and Gaza and Cairo, and she claimed this as intellectual decolonization. And so again, she's spouting about how West has colonized. The West has colonized, and the rebuttal from people was like, "Are you kidding me? Where's the colonization of Islam? What has the Ottoman Empire? What does Islam have done, taking over much of the West, and still does? Taking over Egypt. Egypt was largely a Christian nation until Islam came and took over."
Yeah, that's interesting because we talk about here, just in response, as you mentioned, Christian Egypt, Syria, Palestine, North Africa, Persia. These were all areas that were strongly Christian, and we saw, whenever you're studying history in school, you always hear about two things about why religion is terrible. Number one was the Salem witch hunts, which again was a small little, fragment of religious history or whatever in America, an aberration, I would call it. And then you get the Crusades, right? The bad Crusades. Well, and again, there were some bad things that happened when any wars happened.
Yeah.
But the point was, the Crusades were the response of Christians to 400 years of Muslim aggression. And colonialization, all right? They were doing all of that across all these Christianized nations through violence, horrific violence. That's never brought up. We never talk about Muslim behavior. How about the slave trade among Muslims, many of whom captured white people and put into slavery?
The word slave came from Slavic or white people.
Yeah, exactly. So again, we have a selective view of history that distorts the full picture, and it actually feeds a political activism narrative.
Nobody wants other nations to invade your nation, introduce their culture, and push that upon you. I get that to a certain degree. But it's a nuanced issue because, again, the people who are decrying colonization are themselves colonizing other ideas. On the Obama administration, they were going out to different embassies and nations and spreading the LGBT message. And was like, well, aren't you to many nations who reject that and don't want African nations who want nothing to do with that?
And let me add, they were attaching the aid from the United States, which is desperately needed, to the embrace of these kind of ideas that were offensive to these cultures. So that's just, instead of using a gun to somebody's head, it's just saying, well, we're just going to cut off your money, which is basically accomplishes the same thing.
But that's why she's talking about intellectual colonization. That's going on, spreading these ideas, spreading how you think. So again, it's interesting because instead of saying, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, some ideas are objectively good, because they're based on reality, and therefore we should help others have good ideas they can prosper. So you can't reject that idea and at the same time saying colonization is bad. But the truth is the mix of both, right?
Well, and the sad thing is our universities should be places where we have a view of history with consistent standards and not this selective memory or not just pulling out bits and pieces that serve our agenda. Everything's become so politicized in our universities, and a lot of this, again, has to do with when you throw God out of the mix, then all that exists is power, and you want to be in control because you want to push your agenda.
Well, I argue, once again, university is the worst place for these ideas to brew because there are a bunch of idealistic people, professors, teachers, and students who aren't exercising these ideas in the real world. Because ideas need to be tested, and they need to be seen, hey, you think polygamy is great. You think having multiple partners is great. Let's study that, what that looks like.
You think socialism is great.
Let's go study that in a model. Where's the real world? Those ideas are tested all the time, and the ones that don't work, it's obvious to everybody. But again, in university, you can talk about all day long.
Ideas in the business community literally go out of business when they don't work.
Yeah.
But ideas in our universities hang on for centuries because we have the luxury of pretending like in the world of ideas that somehow these are really beautiful and brilliant.
They're insulated from the real world.
Yep,
right.
Yep. So let's talk. I appreciate Elon Musk. He was, and I know you probably saw that same interview that I saw. He was being interviewed by the Economist editor-in-chief. And I love Elon Musk because he just shoots straight. He ended up, before the interview was over, calling her a traitor to the West, plain and simple. But let's talk about this. Of course, it's the typical thing where she's calling him a member of the far right. And how did Musk respond to that? I thought it was brilliant, man. He didn't take any garbage from her.
Yeah, he basically said, you guys are refraining these ideas as far right. And my quote here, he says, tell me which of these sounds terrible, that we should have secure borders. Yeah. Secure borders is far right at this point.
Secure borders is just simply the belief that nations have the right to exist.
Have borders, yes. Safe cities, sensible spending. Which of these three are far right fringe? I would like to just admonish you and the media for the absurd characterization of the far right is false and misleading and nonsense.
So here again, you have the one with the microphone gets to control the narrative, and the media does this all the time. And so people like us, we're probably like ultra far right. But far right of what? Here again, right and left are determined by a standard. The standard becomes, are you right of the standard? Are you left of the standard? When you get rid of the standard, terms like left and right are meaningless. Yeah. Far right is even more meaningless. Who gets to make those terms up? Well, the person who controls the microphone does.
Well, it's interesting because he said, Musk said to the interview, said, if you take speeches from Obama or Hillary Clinton from 10, 15 years ago, they will be seeing far right to you guys now. So they have simply kind of moved along with the water, with the river, whereas everyone else just stood still. And now all of a sudden we're on the right. Where it's like, I never moved.
Exactly. I haven't changed my position. Here's what gets me, though. If I caught you saying something 20 years ago, and you're saying the direct opposite now, and I say to you, did you say this? Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't have any recollection of that. Well, I do. Here it is in your speech. Let me read it to you just to remind you. Did you say that? Well, yeah, but, and then you come up with some kind of ridiculous argument to basically get yourself off the hook. Or you go up to the person on the street and you say, do you believe, do you agree with this quote? No. Who said that? Do you agree with this quote by President Trump? And it turns out that it was Hillary Clinton said it 10 years ago. At that point, you're busted. Like, you're all mad, but you're not mad at Hillary. You're mad at Trump, but Trump didn't say that. Hillary said it. Right. So again, you're busted, but you got nowhere to go other than, wow, you got me on that. Maybe there's something else at work here besides truth and fact finding and evidence. So this is where it gets me, because of all the gaslighting that's going on. Even when you catch people on the left in their lies and in their duplicity, they still can't embrace it because they're ideologues at the end of the day. All that matters is their political, ideological agenda that they're pushing, and you can throw facts to the wind. This doesn't matter.
What they want is they want power. That's the consistency they have always stick to, right? According to Musk, I don't know him well, but basically he's saying my consistency is I want closed borders, safe borders 20 years ago. I want closed borders today.
And everybody should want these things.
Well, not everyone, because certain members of the Democrats, they wanted power 20 years ago, and today they still want power.
Right.
You see, this is the eyes to be able to see what people actually want. Right. Look through what they're saying. Look how people have shifted the goalposts. Now, this is not just this is also a right issue. People shift their goalposts all the time. But can you have the clarity, honesty? Everyone just needs to take an honest pill for one day and just says, you know what? I don't really care about closed border, open border. I don't really care about sleeping safe. I just want to be more powerful. Okay, then everything makes sense of why you shift things, okay? I just want to be richer. I just want to have more money. And there's some people who actually says, no, I actually just want closed borders. I actually just want safe cities. I don't really care you call me left or right or whatever you want. I want my kids to have a better future. I want my kids to not be affected by socialism. I want my kids to be able to vote freely. I want my kids to have like a pretty stable environment. Not every week there's crazy cultural shifts all around. Like, that's consistent. And I think by analyzing these quotes, you see people what they actually want versus what they say they want.
That's good. Well, and I love it when the left no longer has the high ground of the argument, the facts, or they no longer have the moral argument, the moral high ground, then they resort to name calling. And so she pivots here as she's interviewing Musk, and she basically says, you know what, do you realize that most of the public loathes you, hates you? I mean, loathe is a strong word, right? Yeah. And he nicely pointed out to her that he has 250 million followers on X. And he said, I think a lot more people hate you in the media than you realize. What a great response. That's the truth. The media is at an all-time low in terms of their respect level with the public, confidence level. And he just called her on that. He said, favorable views of journalists hover around 15%. They hate you far more than they hate me. And I just love the fact that he dished it back to her. So, but this is an example of everything we just were highlighting on this podcast of the left, the microphone, the power. It's why, sometimes I think churches like ours, they say, well, do you guys believe in the 7 mountains, view of cultural reformation? That basically there are 7 major mountains of influence in culture, and that whoever controls those mountains controls the direction of the culture. But it somehow has become a radical notion, even among Christians, that for us to say, like, okay, here, journalism is important. We should be involved in journalism. We should make sure that there are other voices behind these microphones that shape and influence the cultural narrative. Oh, well, you're a Christian nationalist. It's kind of ridiculous. We can see why we're in the mess that we're in simply because we've lost our voice.
Yep.
I wanted to highlight a couple of things that are also very scary in the time that we have left. We got about 10 or 15 minutes here. You probably saw they were interviewing, I think Fox News was interviewing one of the leaders of the Democratic Socialist they're not a party. They're an association at this point. They're not an official party. But
they're consuming the Democrat Party.
Yeah, they are. They've
That's
created
where all the energy is from. That's the vision, the energy, all coming from there.
Yep.
Yeah.
The mainstream Democrat, if there's such a thing, old guard Democrat, has no fresh ideas. All they're doing is fight Trump. It's the Democratic Socialists that are coming up with, like you said, all the energy and the ideas. But this is basically what their platform is. They want to strengthen labor unions and expand workers' rights, which, again, I think labor unions have had their place in history to correct abuses. But the whole idea of labor union, that's kind of a Marxist-rooted idea and concept. Universal health care, advocating for Medicare Medicare for all or single-payer system, which again has that idea tested in real life has not turned out very well. To your point,
why do people come to the United States for
the Green New Deal? So they're going to address climate change while creating jobs and reducing inequality. So again, we get into all that Green New Deal stuff, which is not rooted in truth or science, and you get a mess. Affordable social housing, stronger tenant protections, which means take
rent freeze,
all this kind of stuff. Tuition-free public higher education. I wonder how that's going to work. So now you go to college for nothing. Of course, someone's paying the bill for that. Expanded provisions of essential services such as transportation, energy, etc. A lot of these are just boilerplate socialism, Marxism ideas. Advocacy for racial, gender, and social equality. All this comes out of the left playbook. But one of the most radical things that came out in this discussion was the desire to get rid of the presidency and get rid of the Senate.
Pentagon.
Get rid of the Pentagon. Get rid of prisons. She said in the interview, some of these things are going to take a little more time. But let's just take a look at one of these radical ideas, getting rid of the Senate. And let's talk about that a little bit, because I think it's important to understand. Why did the founders create a bicameral, which means a
house,
two-house, the House of Representatives and the Senate? Why did they do that? What was the reasoning behind it? And so you go into a little bit of history here, and you find out, if I can find my right page. I had one that gave the timelines here. Anyway, back in the day, there was a compromise that Congress worked out called the Great Compromise of 1787. Basically, the large states wanted representation based upon population because they had more people. The small states didn't want to get dominated by the larger states, so they wanted equal representation. And so the compromise was these two chambers. One was the House, based on population. One was the Senate, based upon equal representation between each state with 2 senators per state, which, again, seems like a genius idea to address the concerns of both. Of course, in the House represents the people directly. Membership is based on state population. Of course, the more people you have, the more representation you have. Members have a 2-year term. That means that the elections happening every 2 years makes representatives more responsive to public opinion. Of course, all the revenue bills go through the House, and the House has the sole power to impeach federal officials. Now you get to the Senate. The Senate represents the states as political entities, not the individual people. Every state gets 2. Senators serve 6-year terms, with 1/3 elected every 2 years. I thought this was interesting. Again, a lot of people don't know this now, but originally senators were chosen by state legislatures until the 17th Amendment established a direct election. The thing I like about being established by state legislatures is you had somebody there that had experience, demonstrated competence, was selected by their peers as somebody who deserved to go kind of to the next level of leadership. The reason that the Senate is designed differently, and I think this is important, it was intended to be a more deliberative and stable body. James Madison and others feared that public passions could sometimes lead to rash decisions. And the Senate's longer terms and smaller size were meant to encourage careful judgment and to provide a check on the House when public opinion shifted rapidly. George Washington is famously said to have remarked that when the Senate was needed to cool legislation, much like a saucer cools hot tea. So what the leftist radicals want to do is get rid of all that, and they actually want to have the composition of this one people's house made determining on how many votes the winning party got. So if let's say there's 100 people, just throwing it out here, and the winning party got 45 of those 100 votes or 100 seats. I'm sorry, they got 45% of the votes. They would get 45% of the seats. So basically, whatever the dominant party is gets the most seats, which perpetuates the dominant party and creates kind of a minority that never seems to have their voice heard or protected anyway. And so, again, you would have to gut the entire Constitution, which they want to, because so much of it has to do with the powers of the House and how the House and the Senate work together. I'm sorry. You'd have to, if you gut the Senate, you'd have to redo the whole Constitution. And basically, that's what they want to do. They want to also have the Supreme Court selected by vote.
By the legislature, or by Congress.
Yeah.
So the executive branch. So it's mob rule to me.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's going back to mob rule. And there's a reason why you don't do mob rule. Think about it. Can you imagine every 4 years your company or our church changed leadership? Can you imagine how chaotic?
Right.
And that's how, think about United States, every 4 years, or maybe 8 years, but at least every 4 years, a possibility of changing regime. How disruptive is that to our organization? Now, again, because we have the Constitution, America is able to change leadership every 4 years or so, 4 to 8 years, depending if you get reelected, and still maintain this level of continuity because of the Constitution. But one major factor is because the Supreme Court stays consistent, right? You're not changing the Supreme Court.
It's for life.
It's for life.
It's not political.
And the Senate, it's a 6-year term. Now, Congress is two years and so forth. I mean, the House of Reps. So it's embedded in the American government is this really awesome tension between continuity, change, flow, continuity and change and flow.
Yep.
Stability with hearing from people's voices. Now, most people don't understand the genius of that system of check and balances. Some people change more quickly. Some people stay longer.
Yeah.
Okay. If you think purely through the lens of power, that's what you want. But if you purely think through the lens of giving power to the people, that's what you want. You want check and balances. You want some continuity, some flow. You got some people who are staying for life, like the Supreme Court. Some people elected every 4 years, some are 6 years. There's a genius, in my opinion, balance to all that caused America to become the most prosperous nation in the world. And they're just like, no, we're going to go do what the Europeans do. We're going to go do what almost every nation do is mob rule. To me, that's crazy.
So we have, what we just celebrated 250 years as a nation.
Yep.
I don't know exactly how many years as a constitution, but the point is that we've been under that same constitution for over 200 years now. There is only one good example that I can think of anyway off the top of my head of this type of government, and that was the French Revolution. The French Revolution did away with their form of government constitution and created basically a one house mob rule, and it resulted in absolute chaos, bloodshed, and then it swung the other direction, and they got a tyrant named Napoleon. So France, I don't think, is the country that we really want to model ourselves after. But France, the French Revolution was godless. They wanted to have a 10-day week instead of a 7-day week. I mean, basically anything that was a reflection of Judeo-Christian values, they trashed and got rid of, and it ended up in bloodshed. And you look at France today, they're certainly not a global power by any stretch of the imagination. They're still paying for stupidity. So anyway, this doesn't make any sense to do all of this, but this is actually what the Democratic Party is becoming, and it's interesting. And so again, I bring this up. How, as a Christian, do you vote for that? If you don't understand how our form of government is attached back to Scripture and to biblical principles and to wisdom, and if you have the Smithsonian rewriting history, and you have our universities who are selective in their revisionist approach to history, and everything's viewed through a Marxist or CRT kind of a lens, then you're going to raise a bunch of governmental morons even within your own churches who don't know any better, because that's where these voices are shaping them. So how do you vote for these people? You cannot vote for that party. You cannot vote for a party. Another thing I will add is the 259 Democrats in Congress in both houses combined. 259 Democrats just continued to allow the mifepristone, abortion drug to be run through the mail, and basically anybody can order it without any kind of identification or accountability. This is resulting in 1 out of 10 women experiencing serious health consequences as a result. And the entire Democratic bloc, every single one, lockstep, voted to continue to allow this to be purchased through the mail. I don't even think you can get ivermectin through the mail, can you? I don't know. Anyway, the point is, this is just, talk about radical. This is insane. And so I get back to the point, who else are we going to vote for in these elections? You can vote for the party that's going to lead you down the road to Marxism and socialism, or you can at least vote for the party that's trying to stand on the principles that this nation was founded upon. That's our only choice right now. We've got to get involved, and we've got to begin to take over some of these cultural shaping institutions. So anyway, not to mention, we talked about the SAVE. I always get it right. SAVE Act or SAFE Act? SAVE Act.
Yes, the SAVE Act.
So it's talking about election integrity. What just came out was what's going on in New Jersey. Talk about that for a little bit.
New Jersey, the Democrat governor just came out and admitted that, thousands of people were registered, illegals were registered through a glitch to be able to vote, and less than 400 people.
I'm always amazed that glitches always support the Democrats.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing that a computer glitch always favors, or by mail-in votes, they always favor the Democrat who happens to be losing the election at that time?
Well, the couple notes. One is the company that supposedly made the glitch pushed back and said that wasn't a glitch. That was it was programmed so. In other words, who knows who's telling the truth? But interesting that they don't want to take the fall for it. And secondly, in my opinion, it's just the tip of the iceberg, because the voter rolls from blue states aren't given up to the federal government to check against the database and whatnot. This is just the beginning. No one's opened the investigation.
This one shocked the daylights out of me. 75,000 non-citizens were summoned for jury duty in New Jersey every year. Like, here you are, you're going before a jury who's supposed to be of your peers, because there's a serious situation going on in your life and you're seeking justice. And the people sitting in the jury aren't even American citizens. Like, how does that even happen?
This is one of those things that's like, this is the definition of gaslighting. Like, you don't require ID. In certain places, you're not even allowed to show your ID. You mail votes to whoever. Your voter roll is never cleaned up. But at the same time, anyone who says, hey, there might be inconsistencies in our election, we need to check into it, you call them far right. At some point, it's going to happen. That is not a radical right position. The left has made that a radical right to disparage them. The truth, the reality is, no, you need to show your ID. Everybody can understand this. Everybody. Doesn't matter your race or whatever. Understand that you should have an ID to get into a bar or buy cigarettes or buy lottery tickets or whatever it is. You're going to need to show your ID to vote.
To get on an airplane.
And you shouldn't just mail tons of ballots to whoever, a voter roll, people who are dead, whatever, and expect irregularities. That's going to happen.
Basically, this act says, you know what, you need to have ID to make sure that you are the person that you say you are who's voting. What was the second one? I just lost it.
Voter rolls, ID and mail-in ballots.
That was the one.
Yeah.
The elections should be over on the day of the election. Yep. By that night, all the results should be in, unless it's some, crazy close election where there has to be a recount or something like that. But it should be done. It shouldn't go on for a month.
Yep.
And again, the Supreme Court blew that one. But I think that I think Congress can fix it. So again, these used to be common sense things. Now they're not. But the only reason that they're not is because, again, I go back to the megaphone, the power of the voice. And if they say something enough over and over and over again, all of a sudden it becomes common sense. When again, it's gaslighting. You speak lies over and over and over and over again, and eventually people believe those lies. So this I guess this is just my plea: is we've got to continue to get involved. We've got to continue. Not that politics is the answer, but it's one of the major shapers of our culture, our universities, our public education, our lawyers, educators, media, entertainment. I mean, these are important areas for Christians to be involved, and I think that's been the heartbeat of this podcast. Is let's go get involved. Let's sit at the table, share godly ideas and biblical truth, and be a part of reclaiming our culture. And get a job at the Smithsonian. That would be helpful too. All right. Thanks so much, you guys, for tuning in. Hope it's helpful. We love your feedback. Please hit like on this podcast. We were looking for more folks to jump on board and support what we're trying to do here. We'll look forward to seeing you soon, if not even this Sunday. Have a great week.